Welcome to today's session. So in our coaching, one of the major things we're talking about is business strategy. Let's first of all address what exactly is strategy. We're going to take a look at a definition from the great Michael Porter. And we're going to talk about more of Michael Porter's work in this video, but let's talk about strategy. According to Mike Porter, strategy is a broad formula for how a business is going to compete. And depending on the nature of business and your niche, it could be a variety of variables at play that may be peculiar to that industry. How is a business going to compete? What are its goals? And what policies will be needed to carry out those goals? The combination of the ends, the goals for which the firm is striving, and the means, the policies by which it is seeking to get there, gives us our understanding of strategy. So we're thinking about competition. We're thinking about our goals. We're thinking about our policies. And the formula that integrates these and other variables is really strategy. In other words, we could say strategy defines the company's distinctive approach to competing and the competitive advantages on which it will be based. So these are all the variables that should be in your vocabulary as you approach this subject: competition, goals, policies, and your unique formula in your specific company, space, niche for achieving those goals and being competitive. As we discuss the concept of strategy, it is important to realize that there are different types of strategies. When we talk about strategy, we could have an intended strategy. In other words, plan of action that could consist of different steps. We could look at our intended strategy as being different from another type of strategy, and that is emergent strategy. Intended strategy is planned out, but emergent strategy, thinking on the fly. This is strategy that, due to unintended events, is activated and emerges over time. Or we could say it is an intended strategy that has radically shifted and is therefore now an emergent strategy. Now, when you look at intended strategy and emergent strategy, what you'll find is all roads will lead to realized strategy. And this is the strategy that the firm actually follows. Now, when we talk about strategy, it's important to also include another piece of Michael Porter's work, which has to do with how a firm over time might change from an intended strategy to an emergent one. It is based on a number of factors. And those factors we will explore in the work of Michael Porter under the topic of Porter's 5 forces. The topic of Porter's 5 forces comes up quite a lot in management. I'm just going to read from our book in project management, where we talk about Porter's 5 forces to better understand the business space. So if you have that book, it's on page 481, and the book is called PMP Immersion, and that book was published in 2022. But it reads, Porter's 5 forces. This is an example of how to address the external business environment. And it can be observed from this concept, the work of Michael Porter. When using this framework, there are 5 things you need to think about. The first one is the bargaining power of suppliers. Second one, bargaining power of the buyers. Third one, the threat of new entrants into that market space. Number 4, the threat of substitutes. And finally, number 5, industry rivalry. Now, the first 4 of these forces creates the nucleus of industry rivalry, which is not unhealthy. In fact, bargaining power of the suppliers, of the buyers, the threat of new entrants, and the threat of substitutes, it keeps us on our toes, right? It's healthy. There's nothing wrong in that. The concept draws from industrial organization ergonomics to derive 5 forces that determine the competitive intensity and therefore the attractiveness or lack thereof of an industry in terms of its profitability. You have to be really determined to go into a business that is highly competitive. An unattractive industry is one of which the effect of these 5 forces reduces overall profitability. So let's take a look at the general model. Here's a good image of the model. Let's expand it so you can get a good look at it. So let's talk about these in a bit more detail. Think about this as being in a marketplace, in a business environment, right? The threat of new entrants keeps those who are already existing in the marketplace on their toes, on their A game, always looking to innovate, always looking to be ahead. Bargaining power of suppliers also dictates how we behave in the market space, how we act, how we jack up our prices, how we keep our prices in line with others. The same for the bargaining power of buyers. If buyers have more options, it's going to affect how you position yourself in the marketplace. And of course, the threat of substitute products or services will also influence you. Now think about it like this. Not only will it influence how you behave in market space right now, it will also influence how you think, how you act, and how you compete. See, and that's the whole idea behind this topic. But let's go into some more details with some specific definitions of each one, and then we'll talk about rivalry among existing entrants. Now let's talk about the overarching concept here in the middle. Rivalry among existing entrants. This can be viewed as the level and the intensity of competition in that industry. Think about the number of competitors and their ability to undercut a company. I like the way Investopedia puts it. It says the larger the number of competitors, along with the number of equivalent products and services they offer, the lesser the power of a company. So if you've got more people in that space, there's going to be a smaller piece of the pie. and that leads to rivalry. And that could actually end up being unhealthy, depending on the specific variables at play. So suppliers and buyers seek out a company's competition if they're able to offer a better deal or lower prices. Conversely, when competitive rivalry is low, a company has greater power to charge higher prices and set the terms of deals. So think about it. You want a commercial airline. How many companies offer that? It's a very small space. The two big kahunas, Airbus, Boeing, there are not a lot of competitors. So even though there is rivalry, it's not over the top. But in smaller industries that make smaller products and services that we use on a day-to-day basis, we see a lot more rivalry among existing entrants where there's a smaller piece of the pie for everyone as a result of those involved in that industry. Let's talk about potential of new entrants into the industry. A company's power is also affected by the force of new entrants into its market. The less time and money it costs for a competitor to enter a company's market and be an effective competitor, the more an established company's position could be significantly weakened. A hot dog stand. What does it take to set up a hot dog stand? Very little. But there's probably a lot more people in the world that would buy a hot dog than would buy a 747. So it's not an insurmountable problem. However, if you narrow down a geographic area and there is a lot of competition for selling hot dogs, then that changes the game. An industry with strong barriers to entry is ideal for existing companies within that industry, since the company would be able to charge higher prices and negotiate better terms. So sometimes those strong barriers to entry could actually help companies that are already in it. Let's talk about the power of suppliers. Bargaining power of suppliers. This could also drive up the cost of inputs, and it's affected by the number of suppliers in that space. The number of suppliers of key inputs of a good or service and how unique those inputs are, how much it will cost a company to switch to another supplier. The semiconductor space. There are quite a few suppliers, but not everyone makes every semiconductor needed in every appliance. The fewer suppliers to an industry, the more a company would depend on a supplier. As a result, the supplier has more clout, more power, and they could drive up costs and push for other advantages in trade. On the other hand, when there are many suppliers or low switching costs between rival suppliers, a company can keep its input cost lower and enhance its profits. So think about an industry such as the food industry. Are there any unique inputs that only one company can provide or supply? Well, that will be a factor in what those in the industry end up charging and the overall experience of the customer, which takes us to the next one, the power of customers. This is the ability that customers have to drive prices lower, or their level of power is one of 5 forces. It is affected by how many buyers or customers a company has. The more buyers you have, the less clout the customer in general does, right? So think about it like this. A company that has many smaller independent customers will have an easier time charging higher prices to increase profitability. But if you have few customers, you're going to be more cautious. This concept of the power of customers, again, is affected by how many buyers or customers you have as a seller and how significant each one of those customers is. And what would it cost you to find that customer if you were going after that customer new? What would it cost you to advertise? What would it cost you to convince that customer to come along and go with your company? The final one we're looking at here is threat of substitute products or services. We also refer to this plainly as the threat of substitutes. So substitutes refers to goods or services that can be used in place of your product or your services because these could pose a threat. Companies that produce goods or services for which there are no close substitutes will have more power to increase prices and lock in favorable terms. For example, there's a firm that offers a simulator in preparing people in the military for real combat. It's a simulator. They are highly advantageous because they don't have a lot of threats or competitors in that space or substitutes in that space. When close substitutes are available, customers will have the option to forego buying your product and your power can be greatly weakened. So understanding Porter's 5 forces and how they apply to industry can help your company adjust its business strategy to better use its resources to generate higher earnings for your investors. So coming into a business or coming into a market space, be aware of your position. Be aware of the existing buyers and sellers, your competitors, suppliers, and any threats. This is going to help you formulate your strategy. Be aware of the competition. Be aware of what your goals are, not seeking over ambitious goals, but being highly strategic in crafting your intended strategy and being flexible enough to adapt to an emergent strategy as needed. And coupled together, this will help give birth to your realized strategy. All right. I hope you found this to be useful. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.